The echo of my sister's voice, cracking with anger and heartbreak, still haunts me. One moment, she was standing at the altar in a cascading white gown, poised and radiant. The next, her accusatory finger was pointed squarely at my chest, her eyes filled with betrayal I never saw coming. I remember the guests' collective gasp, the hush that settled over the chapel like a held breath. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the wedding music. The Reverend froze. The groom, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, went ghostly pale. And in that breathless interval, I realized everything we thought we knew was about to change. A family like ours. My sister Naomi and I had always been close, at least, that's how I remembered it. She was younger by 2 years, but she carried herself with a certain regal grace that made people assume she was the older sibling. Naomi was the first to hug me when I came home from college, the one who kept postcards from my cross-country trips plastered on her bedroom wall. We giggled through countless late-night movie marathons and shared secrets about crushes we had, how school was going, and all the messy little insecurities that come with growing up. Our mother raised us on her own after Dad left. No dramatic divorce, no messy scandal, just a silent departure. We woke up one morning, found his car gone, and eventually discovered he'd moved to another state. In place of paternal guidance, Naomi and I learned to rely on each other. We took out the trash together, cooked dinner for Mom when she came home exhausted, and planned small surprises to lift her spirits. If we argued, we made up quickly. If one of us stumbled, the other offered a steadying hand. That's why, when Naomi screamed at me in front of an entire wedding congregation, it felt like the very ground had split open beneath me. Naomi met Arthur, yes, the groom, the man who would change our family's dynamic forever, during her junior year of college. He was a business major with a charismatic laugh and, from what I could see, a heart that beat for adventure. He introduced himself to me with a firm handshake and a quip about how Naomi never stopped talking about her protective older brother. I found that endearing, if a bit over the top, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Arthur seemed to dote on Naomi in a way that made me think, finally, she's found someone who truly gets her. 4 months before the wedding, Naomi and Arthur were inseparable. They scouted wedding venues, giggled about flower arrangements, and spent entire Saturdays sampling gourmet cakes. I'd never seen Naomi so animated, so vibrant, like she was lit from within by the excitement of her upcoming marriage. While I had my own life in another city, a job, an apartment, a routine, I promised her I'd be around for every important milestone. She insisted I stand in as a groomsman. "You're not just my brother," she said, beaming one evening over dinner. "You're Arthur's friend too." Back then, I was proud to see her so happy. No alarm bells rang. I never suspected the undercurrent of tension that would surge to the surface and nearly destroy us all. The wedding day unravels. Naomi's wedding day started like a fairy tale. The morning sun brightened a clear azure sky, bathing the heritage mansion in golden light. White rose petals lined the cobblestone path, swirling whenever a gentle breeze brushed by. I arrived early, wearing the gray suit Naomi had chosen for me, and found her bustling with last-minute preparations in the bridal suite. She was breathtaking in her white lace gown. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, and she looked every bit the blushing bride. When I hugged her, I felt a slight tremble in her shoulders. "Nerves?" I teased, stepping back to get a good look at her. She let out a shaky laugh. "A bit. But also, I have this strange feeling like something's going to go wrong. It's probably just typical wedding jitters." I offered her a reassuring smile. "Everything's going to be perfect," I said, genuinely believing it. Arthur, standing with his groomsmen in a separate room, seemed calmer than Naomi. He joked around, poked fun at how fidgety his best man was, and gave me a friendly pat on the back. That was Arthur's demeanor, cool, unflustered, always ready with a jest. Nothing about him hinted that he was on edge, or that he held any secret capable of tearing our family apart. The ceremony began smoothly. Soft music swelled. The bridesmaids glided down the aisle in pastel dresses. I took my place among the groomsmen, my heart swelling with pride as the wedding march started. Naomi appeared at the end of the aisle, arm linked with our mother's, who was beaming and teary-eyed. I didn't dare blink as my sister made her way toward Arthur. The vow exchange started with sweet words of love and devotion, and I felt my emotions rising in my chest. Perhaps I'd never realized how much I cared about seeing Naomi settled and happy. But then, as if directed by some invisible puppet master, the mood shifted. Naomi paused mid-vow, her voice catching in her throat. I saw her gaze snap to me, eyes wide with anger, hurt, an emotion I couldn't decipher. Arthur stood there, confusion darkening his features. My sister's hands began to shake. "You," she whispered, her words directed at me. "How could you do this to me?" The entire congregation froze. Even the wedding officiant lowered his microphone, eyes darting between Naomi and me as tension mounted. My stomach knotted. What on earth was she talking about? I managed a step forward, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Naomi? What's wrong?" My voice echoed across the hushed crowd. "Don't pretend you don't know." Her voice cracked, accusing. "I trusted you. My own brother. And you've been lying to me. About everything." My mind went blank. I looked around, hoping to find an explanation in the sea of concerned faces, but all I saw was confusion mirroring my own. Naomi's bridesmaids looked at each other in shock, and one of Arthur's groomsmen laid a cautious hand on Arthur's shoulder, as though bracing him for something. What did I lie about? I croaked, dread settling in my chest like a cold stone. Naomi's lips trembled. "Stop playing innocent," she shouted, voice echoing in the stillness of the chapel. Tears began to glisten in her eyes, and I felt a twist in my gut, fear that something truly devastating was unfolding. Then, in one swift motion, she turned to Arthur, who stood frozen in place, a stunned expression etched on his features. "Tell him," she demanded. "Tell him what you told me this morning. About the messages, the calls, everything." Arthur took a halting breath, eyes bouncing between Naomi and me. He looked like a man backed into a corner, unsure how to proceed. Finally he spoke, voice shaky. "Naomi thinks you've been trying to sabotage us." Those words sliced through me. Sabotage them? My head reeled. The congregation was on edge. People leaned forward in their pews, straining to hear. I saw our mother stand up, clutching her handbag, her expression painfully puzzled. "I don't understand," I said, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding dangerously fast. "In what possible way could I be sabotaging your wedding?" Arthur swallowed hard. "Naomi got an email from me this morning. It claimed that you were feeding me information behind her back. Things about her insecurities, her finances, personal details that you said might be useful in a prenuptial agreement." He paused, as if the very idea was sickening him. "But I never sent any such email. And it said you and I had been talking about how to protect my assets from Naomi." A wave of murmuring rippled through the crowd. My face flushed hot, and I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, half from anger, half from heartbreak. "That's absurd," I said, voice tight. "I never spoke to you about anything like that, Arthur. You know me better than that. Naomi, I would never do that to you." Naomi's shoulders rose and fell with her ragged breathing. Her eyes flicked to me, shining with tears and betrayal. "I want to believe you," she said, voice trembling. "But I saw the evidence. Screenshots of text exchanges, call logs that match your phone number." "They're fake," I blurted. "They have to be." "I'd never." "I saw them," Arthur insisted, though he looked conflicted. "The phone number is yours, man. The times, the details. Everything points to you calling me, texting me, all to undermine Naomi's trust. My guess was you wanted us to sign some unfair prenuptial." Naomi was furious when she saw it. That's why she confronted me this morning, just before the ceremony. My mind raced. Who could possibly have done this? Why would anyone frame me for something so malicious? I looked back at Naomi, my voice cracking with raw desperation. "Naomi, I swear I've never done anything to hurt you, especially not on your wedding day. This is insane. Someone is framing me." She pressed her lips together, tears spilling over. "But who?" she whispered, her face scrunching in confusion. She turned to Arthur. What if you're lying now? What if the email was actually from you and you're just trying to throw my brother under the bus?" Arthur's eyes widened, offended. "Why would I sabotage my own wedding and then blame it on your brother?" "I don't know." Naomi cried. "Everything is spinning. I don't know who to believe." A few guests stirred, uncertain whether to remain or to slip out discreetly. The wedding officiant cleared his throat, but seemed at a loss for how to handle the meltdown unraveling before him. A day that began with promise was collapsing into chaos. I glanced at our mother, who had tears streaming down her face, but she seemed too shocked to intervene. It was at that moment that Arthur's expression changed, like a man who just remembered a vital piece of a puzzle. "Wait," he said, voice low. I told you about those calls and texts, but there was something else I was keeping to myself. I thought I could handle it. I didn't want to ruin the day. Naomi whipped around to face him, confusion knitting her brow. Something else. He nodded, swallowing again. Yesterday evening, I got a phone call from an unknown number. The person said they had dirt on your brother. They warned me to end the wedding or risk going through with a marriage built on lies. I hung up, thinking it was some prank, but then the messages you showed me today seemed to confirm it. Fear coiled in my stomach. What exactly did they say about me? Arthur's eyes flicked to me, pity and uncertainty mingling. They claimed you were a con artist, someone who'd sabotage Naomi's marriage for a share of her inheritance. They even suggested you had gambling debts and needed the money. He shook his head. I didn't believe them at first, but then the messages in Naomi's email came through, and it seemed to match the narrative. A dizzy sensation washed over me. I had no gambling debts, no reason to want my sister's inheritance, and absolutely no reason to sabotage her wedding. Everyone who knew me would find the idea ludicrous, but in a high-stakes moment like a wedding, especially with fabricated evidence, logic could drown in the swirl of panic. A sudden realization. My gaze fell to the wooden floor of the chapel, my world askew. Then I remembered something, an odd detail from the wedding preparations. A month ago, Naomi had fired a wedding planner who was incompetent and occasionally hostile. The planner, furious about the termination, had threatened to ruin the day if she wasn't compensated in full. Naomi had brushed it off. Could the wedding planner have orchestrated this entire charade? But before I could voice that suspicion, Arthur took a deep, trembling breath and turned to face the congregation. "Everyone, can we please take a moment?" he asked, his voice steadying. "We seem to be dealing with a serious misunderstanding. It's not fair to any of you to stand here and watch this unfold." He looked to Naomi. "If it's all right with you, I'd like a word in private. The three of us." Naomi hesitated, then nodded stiffly. The officiant, relieved to gain some measure of control, encouraged the guests to step out into the courtyard for refreshments while we sorted out our family matter. In a matter of minutes, the chapel emptied, leaving only the three of us plus a couple of close family members, our mother among them, along with Arthur's parents, who hovered near the pews. My sister stared at Arthur, her features torn between anger and heartbreak. I saw her mouth move as if she wanted to say something, but no words emerged. So I spoke first. "Naomi," I said, my voice quieter now that the echo of the crowd was gone. "Look at me. You know me better than anyone. Would I ever do something like this to you?" Her lips parted, and tears brimmed in her eyes again. "I don't know," she whispered, almost broken. "I've never been a bride before, and I've never seen you under these circumstances. Maybe you're different than I realized." That stung deeply. "I understand how shocking this is," I replied, forcing myself not to lash out in my own hurt. "But you have to trust me. I don't have any gambling debts, I'm not after your inheritance, and I never told Arthur anything about a prenup. Someone is trying to pit us against each other." Arthur rested a hand on her shoulder, looking torn. "Naomi," he said, voice gentle, "your brother has always treated you well. Could these messages be faked?" She shook her head slowly, her breath hitching. They looked so real. "The phone number. It's his." The text messages mentioned personal details only he could know. A spark of defiance flared in me. "Anyone can spoof a phone number," I pointed out, "especially in this day and age. And as for personal details, well, you did mention a few of your private matters in front of that wedding planner we fired. Or any number of acquaintances could have overheard you talking. You're not exactly secretive about your finances, Naomi. You've told friends and family that you'd be inheriting some money from Aunt Martha." Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, doubt wavering on her face. Arthur's father, a stern-looking man with graying temples, cleared his throat. "If this is all a misunderstanding," he said, "we need to find proof. These accusations have cast a dark shadow over the ceremony. My son's wedding day is in tatters. I don't see how we can continue the wedding until we clear this up," Arthur said gravely, pressing his palms together. "Naomi, I love you, but we can't start our marriage if there's even a shred of doubt." Naomi nodded, tears streaking her makeup. "I agree," she managed. "But how do we prove one way or another who's lying?" We fell into tense silence. It was our mother who finally spoke, her voice tremulous. "Naomi, your brother is telling you the truth. I know he wouldn't do this. We raised each other, There's no malicious bone in his body. She took a shaky breath. I'm going to call the phone company. We'll see if these calls and texts actually went through his account. Arthur's mother stepped forward too, offering a shaky smile. Yes, that's a good start. We should also see if there's a way to trace the email's origin. Maybe whoever sent it left clues. On that note, the adults in the room sprang into action, calling customer support lines, pulling up phone records, and scanning email headers on Arthur's phone. Arthur hovered by Naomi, trying to steady her. I stood apart, arms crossed, feeling a strange mixture of fury at whoever was behind this and heartbreak that my sister could believe I'd do such a thing. What followed was 2 hours of tense investigation, 2 hours in which wedding guests outside waited in confused anticipation, sampling canapés and sipping champagne in awkward silence. Some had begun to leave, confused about whether the ceremony would ever resume. Eventually, the phone company confirmed there were no records of me calling or texting Arthur's phone at those reported times. Arthur also discovered that the IP address used to send the incriminating email to Naomi was masked through a series of proxies. Still, he managed to glean a suspicious detail: the initial location pinged near the offices of the very wedding planner Naomi had fired. I nearly whooped in triumph. That has to be it, I said, feeling the tension in my shoulders loosen for the first time. That planner threatened to ruin your day if you didn't pay up, Naomi. Naomi, looking both hopeful and horrified, stared at Arthur. But how would they know so many personal details about me? And how would they get your phone number to fake the calls? Arthur took out his phone, flipping through old text messages. We shared our personal info, addresses, phone numbers, when we signed the contract with them months ago. They had direct lines to both of us, plus they overheard us talking about finances. It wouldn't be too hard for them to piece something together to make it look real. Naomi's jaw tightened. I saw the shift in her expression, a wave of relief that maybe her brother was innocent, mixed with fury that someone she'd hired and trusted could be so vindictive. She turned to me slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks again. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have believed you. I swallowed back a knot of emotion. It's okay, I managed, though it wasn't entirely true. Part of me still felt the sting that she had doubted me so thoroughly. But I saw the anguish in her eyes, the love we'd built over a lifetime overshadowed by a single morning of cunning deceit. And so I embraced her. We'll fix this, I murmured. Arthur, clearly relieved that the evidence was pointing away from me, let out a long, unsteady breath. So what do we do now? Confront them. Naomi nodded, her expression steely. Yes. But first, she wiped her tears and squared her shoulders. We need to tell everyone what's going on. They're probably panicking out there. The groom's confession. Naomi, Arthur, and I stepped out of the chapel, flanked by our parents. We gathered the guests who remained into the courtyard. Dozens of concerned eyes fixed on us, waiting for an explanation. Naomi stood at the front, her gown fluttering in the gentle breeze, shoulders taut with the tension of the moment. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, Arthur placed a hand on her arm. Let me, he said gently. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. Family and friends, thank you for your patience. You all saw a very dramatic moment earlier. He glanced at Naomi and me, then continued, his voice trembling. We discovered that the accusations, aimed at Naomi's brother, were likely fabricated by someone outside of our family. We believe it's related to a business dispute. Naomi, and I want you to know the wedding is still on. If she'll still have me. A ripple of murmured relief swept through the courtyard. Naomi, tears in her eyes, gave a small nod, stepping into his arms for a moment. Applause broke out, nervous, hesitant, but also supportive. It wasn't the jubilant cheer you might expect at a wedding, but a heartfelt show of solidarity from the guests who cared about us. But then Arthur, arms still around Naomi, took a deep breath. Before we proceed, he said, his tone grave, I need to come clean about something. I realize now this is part of why it was so easy for me to believe your brother might be involved in sabotage. My heart skipped a beat. Naomi turned in his arms, concern etched in her face. Arthur, she asked softly, what are you talking about? Arthur's gaze flicked to me, guilt weighing heavily behind his eyes. I lied about one thing. This is hard to say, but I've been wrestling with a personal situation. And yes, someone tried to blackmail me about it. His voice cracked on the word blackmail. They sent a message saying if I didn't call off the wedding, they'd expose me. I panicked. I hid it from you. The entire courtyard stilled. Naomi's voice was hushed but urgent. Expose you for what? Arthur swallowed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. I owe money, he said, shame flooding his expression. A lot of money. I made some bad investments last year, tried to keep up appearances, especially around you and your family. I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could fix it before the wedding. Naomi's expression wavered between concern and anger. Why would that lead you to believe my brother wanted to sabotage us? She asked in a near whisper. Arthur swallowed again, tears forming in his eyes. I was vulnerable, scared, and guilty. When I saw those fake texts and calls from him about a prenup, I let myself believe it might be real. I was looking for a scapegoat, someone to blame for my own mistakes. He hung his head. I'm so sorry. I betrayed your trust by not telling you. I also betrayed your brother by suspecting him without proof. A hush of stunned relief and tension descended on the crowd. Naomi's gaze flicked to me, and I saw her heart break. But I also recognized the way her hand gripped Arthur's arm tighter, as if to say, I'm not letting this ruin what we have. She turned back to him, voice trembling. We should have been open with each other from the start, she said. This only made us more vulnerable to manipulation. Then she looked at the guests, forcing a wavering smile. But we've come this far, and I love this man. She lifted her chin. I'm not leaving him at the altar. The courtyard erupted in applause, this time more robust, more genuine. People were relieved the wedding wasn't cancelled, proud of Naomi for standing her ground. The wedding resumed in a truncated form. Instead of returning to the chapel for a second vow attempt, Naomi and Arthur decided to hold the rest of the ceremony right there in the courtyard, in front of the fountain lined with flowers. It felt more intimate, less orchestrated than a typical wedding. The officiant, looking somewhat relieved to deliver normal vows instead of presiding over a meltdown, led them through their promises of love and commitment. When they exchanged rings, the crowd cheered and wiped away tears of joy. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the question, who had orchestrated the sabotage? We had strong suspicions, but no concrete proof beyond the IP address clue and the old threat from the wedding planner. My frustration burned as I considered how close I came to being irreversibly labeled a traitor in my own sister's eyes. After the ceremony, while guests mingled under twinkle lights and servers passed around champagne, Naomi and Arthur huddled with me in a corner of the lawn. We can't let this go, Naomi said quietly, resolved. We have to find proof. I won't let someone get away with nearly ruining the best day of my life. Arthur nodded. I'll hire a professional to look into it. We'll gather phone and email records, talk to any mutual contacts who might have known about the wedding details. He shot me an apologetic glance. And I'll do whatever it takes to clear your name fully. I smiled, touched by his sincerity. Thank you, I said. But let's enjoy your wedding reception for now. We'll fight the battle tomorrow. Naomi exhaled, her face softening. Agreed. We deserve a day of happiness. Revelations at the reception. Music drifted across the open-air dance floor, where some of the guests, having recovered from the drama, now spun in slow circles beneath strings of fairy lights. I slipped away to find my mother, who had retreated to the fringes of the celebration. She was nursing a glass of white wine, looking both relieved and drained. How are you holding up? I asked gently. She sighed, giving me a small smile. Better, now that things have settled. Then her expression turned serious. I'm proud of you for keeping your composure. That couldn't have been easy. I shrugged, rubbing the back of my neck. I was terrified. I hate that Naomi believed it, even for a moment. But I also get it. When someone manipulates you into seeing proof, it can rattle anyone's trust. Mom placed her hand on mine. She'll spend the rest of her life making it up to you, I'm sure. The conversation paused when I noticed a tall, gaunt figure lurking near the entrance of the venue. The wedding planner Naomi had fired. My pulse spiked. She wore a smug expression, arms folded, as if surveying the scene. I nudged my mother. Look, I whispered. We moved closer cautiously. The planner, Clarice, met my gaze with a disdainful sneer. Lovely wedding, she drawled, her tone dripping sarcasm. Heard it was eventful. My chest tightened, anger flaring. What are you doing here? You weren't invited. Clarice shrugged elegantly. I just happened to be passing by. Curiosity got the better of me, especially after your sister canceled my services so rudely. Looks like there was a bit of excitement during the ceremony. Her eyes sparkled in a way that made my stomach churn. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I asked, voice tense. She flicked her gaze to the dance floor, feigning a bored expression. "Oh, I might have heard rumors. Something about sabotage and betrayal, was it?" Before I could respond, Naomi approached, Arthur trailing behind. The tension crackled in the air. Naomi's hands balled into fists at her sides. "Clarice," she said through gritted teeth, "you have no business being here." Clarice merely raised an eyebrow. "Don't worry, dear. I'm not staying. I only came to see how well you managed without my services. From the looks of it, your big day didn't go quite as smoothly as you hoped." "Pity." Arthur stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "We know you sent those messages, forged those calls. We have the IP logs." A flicker of surprise flashed across Clarice's face, though she masked it quickly. "I have no idea what you're accusing me of," she said smoothly. "And even if I did, I doubt you have conclusive proof. IP addresses can be misleading, you know. People share Wi-Fi, or use the same coffee shops." Naomi's face was a portrait of rage and resolve. "We will find proof. And when we do, I'll press charges. You tried to ruin my relationship with my brother on the most important day of my life." Clarice held Naomi's gaze without flinching. "All I did was watch from afar," she said. "If your relationship with your brother is so fragile that it snapped over a few alleged phone calls, perhaps you need to look inwards." Then her lips curved into a cold smile. "But you're right, dear. If you somehow prove I was involved, by all means, drag me to court. Let's see if your pockets are deep enough to handle a legal battle." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Naomi trembling in fury. Arthur slipped an arm around her shoulders, gently guiding her back toward the festive glow of the reception. My mother and I exchanged uneasy glances, a single question pounding in my mind. Was that a threat, or simply a taunt from a vindictive woman? A determined pursuit. In the weeks following the wedding, life didn't exactly return to normal. Naomi and Arthur juggled the early days of marriage with the stress of launching an investigation against Clarice. They hired a private digital forensics specialist to comb through email metadata and phone records. Meanwhile, I collaborated with them, offering up my phone for examination, my own email logs, anything to help prove my innocence beyond a doubt. Naomi, torn between relief that the wedding was over and anger that Clarice had tried to sabotage it, kept insisting that she wanted to see Clarice held accountable. Arthur's big confession, his hidden debts, lingered in the background, too. Sometimes, I'd see the strain in Naomi's posture when finances came up. She told me quietly one night that she felt guilty for suspecting me, but also betrayed by Arthur's secrecy. Their newlywed bliss was marred by the residual tension from the wedding day fiasco. As for me, I wrestled with conflicted emotions. On one hand, I was furious at Clarice for nearly destroying my relationship with Naomi. On the other, a small part of me still felt bruised that Naomi had believed the lies, if only briefly. But we were working through it. She apologized more than once, tears in her eyes, telling me how much she valued our bond. Over time, as more evidence pointed to Clarice's involvement, the wedge between my sister and me began to shrink. Finally, 6 weeks after the wedding, the digital forensics specialist made a breakthrough. He discovered hidden markers in the original email that led to Clarice's personal VPN account, a service she'd used to obfuscate her location. The phone logs also suggested a call was made from her business line, disguised through a call spoofing app. It wasn't the ironclad proof you'd see on a police procedural, but it was enough to build a strong case. Naomi and Arthur consulted a lawyer, who recommended they file a civil suit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. When the paperwork was drawn up, Naomi asked me to stand with her at the initial hearing. I agreed without hesitation. Clarice responded by hiring her own attorney, a smug man who tried to paint Naomi and Arthur as petty clients who had parted ways with Clarice's boutique wedding services on bad terms. But the volume of digital evidence was damning. The legal process dragged on, as these things often do, but each court date brought us closer to closure. Arthur's mother and father testified about the phone calls he'd received, and the officiant was subpoenaed to recount the disastrous moment in the chapel. My phone company provided records showing no calls or texts were made from my number at the alleged times. Bit by bit, the puzzle formed a clearer picture. Clarice, feeling wronged and humiliated by Naomi's decision to fire her, had orchestrated a revenge plot to sow doubt and mistrust on the wedding day. The scare tactic was designed to either stop the wedding or overshadow it with scandal. healing and moving forward. Though the court case was ongoing, Naomi and Arthur found some peace. They took a brief honeymoon after the initial chaos, heading to a secluded cabin near a lake, where they disconnected from the world. During that time, I heard from Naomi daily. She sent me pictures of them hiking, cooking over an open fire, reading books by candlelight. She told me it was the break they both needed to heal from the wedding day's emotional wounds. I realized then that despite all the drama, love endured, and perhaps even grew stronger in the face of adversity. When they returned, Arthur sat me down with Naomi, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a thank you card and a check for a sizable amount of money. I stared in confusion. Arthur cleared his throat. "It's not charity," he said, face tinged with embarrassment. "It's repayment. For the private investigator's fees, for the emotional distress, for the time you lost defending yourself when you did nothing wrong." I tried to hand it back, feeling uncomfortable. "You don't owe me anything." He shook his head. "This is my way of showing I'm sorry. You saved our wedding day, in a sense. And I feel terrible that I ever doubted you." Naomi placed her hand on mine. "Please," she said, voice soft, "we want you to have it. You have your own life and responsibilities. This is just a gesture to remind you that you matter to us." Reluctantly, I accepted, though I told them it was more important that we rebuild trust. Naomi and I shared a long hug, letting the tension of the past weeks melt away. The final confession in court. Months later, the lawsuit reached a climactic point when Clarice, under significant legal pressure, agreed to a deposition. She showed up in a sharply tailored suit, her eyes flashing with defiance. But after hours of intense questioning, cracks appeared in her story. Ultimately, pinned by the forensic evidence and the risk of criminal charges, Clarice admitted to sending the emails and forging the text logs. "It was never supposed to blow up so badly," she muttered, face pale. "I wanted them to panic, to regret firing me, maybe to pay me double in hush money if I threatened to leak the scandal. I didn't expect the bride to confront her brother in the middle of the ceremony." She fidgeted with her pen. "I did it for revenge, all right? They treated me like I was incompetent, so I thought I'd show them what real damage looks like." The court reporter's typing was the only sound in the silent room. Naomi closed her eyes, tears escaping down her cheeks. Arthur let out a slow, shaky exhale, relief and residual fury battling within him. I felt something that was equal parts anger and pity. Yes, Clarice had done something unforgivable, but seeing her reduced to a hollow confession gave me no real satisfaction, only a sense that we could finally move on. A new kind of family. With Clarice's confession on record, our case was essentially won. The judge ruled in our favor, awarding damages for defamation and emotional distress. It wouldn't erase the memory of the chaos at Naomi's wedding, but it provided a measure of vindication and a public record that declared my innocence. In the months that followed, Naomi and Arthur threw themselves into building a marriage founded on honesty and open communication. Arthur tackled his financial woes head-on, working out a plan to repay his debts, with Naomi's support. They sought counseling to address the trust issues that had surfaced. I saw them grow stronger as a couple, forging a partnership that felt authentic rather than superficially perfect. As for me, I visited them more often, re-establishing the easygoing bond I'd shared with Naomi before the wedding. Sometimes, Arthur and I played basketball in their driveway, joking about how we nearly ended up as enemies thanks to a malicious wedding planner. Naomi would watch from the porch, sipping lemonade, smiling that broad, unguarded smile of hers. One evening, after a particularly close game, Arthur clapped me on the shoulder. "Your family, in every sense," he told me, his expression earnest. "I hope you know how much I appreciate your patience with me." I gave a small smile in return, nodding. "Likewise. We're all good." A moment of reflection. It took me a long time to fully heal from the shock of being accused by my own sister, even though it was under extreme and manipulative circumstances. But in the year that followed, our family found a new equilibrium. We invited my mother along on group vacations. We had regular Sunday dinners. We celebrated the smallest milestones, like when Naomi learned to cook her grandmother's famous casserole without burning the edges, or when Arthur landed a better-paying job that helped with his debt. Surprisingly, this ordeal also clarified for me how fragile trust can be, and how important it is to invest in that trust daily. Naomi and I spent hours talking about our childhood memories, reaffirming what we meant to each other. She told me that one of her biggest regrets was letting panic overshadow her faith in me. I admitted that I, too, might have jumped to conclusions if positions were reversed. Sometimes illusions crafted to look like truth can be terrifyingly convincing. I'd love to say we lived happily ever after, but real life seldom wraps up so neatly. Even though Clarice was penalized by the court, she continued to claim the punishment was excessive. She occasionally ranted on social media that Naomi and I had ruined her business, though she lost most of her clientele anyway. The important thing was that she no longer had power over my family's narrative. Naomi and Arthur framed a particular photo from the wedding, one taken just after we'd resolved the crisis in the courtyard. In it, Naomi is beaming in her gown, Arthur stands beside her, and I'm on her other side, the three of us hugging. My mother is in the background, dabbing tears from her eyes. Some of the guests are out of frame, but you can see the edges of their smiles. That photo captures a moment of relief and unity right after we made the public announcement that the accusations were lies. Naomi hung it in their living room, next to a plaque that reads, "Every storm runs out of rain." She told me once that it serves as a reminder that even when trust is shaken to its core, you can rebuild, if you're willing to confront the lies head-on and fight for the truth. I've visited them many times since. Occasionally, I catch Naomi gazing at that photo. There's a sadness in her smile, but also gratitude. And when she notices me looking, she'll say, "We made it, didn't we?" I'll nod. Because we did. We weathered a storm none of us saw coming. The groom's confession might have changed everything, but in the end, it also paved the way for honesty that was long overdue. Our family might bear the scar of betrayal, but we're stronger for it, bound by a hard-earned resilience. I once asked Naomi if she'd consider renewing her vows in a few years, maybe to replace the memory of that chaotic day with something calmer. She laughed softly and replied, "Why would I want to replace it? That day showed me who was truly there for me, in the worst moments. It taught me the value of trust, love, and forgiveness. That's more meaningful than any perfect ceremony." And that, I realized, was the real gift hidden in the rubble of lies, a chance for us to grow, to hold on tighter to one another, knowing that sometimes the unlikeliest storms reveal just how deep our roots run.